Hi, my name is Ben, physical therapist here at Total Physical Therapy in Amarillo. And today we're going to be discussing the topic on what we need to do to appropriately change or modify activity after we get an injury. So life happens, and unfortunately we end up with an injury. Almost everybody knows the acronym RICE. R stands for rest, I stands for ice, C stands for compression, and E stands for elevation. And when we think of this term RICE, when we think of the word rest, we think that we need to go lay down and completely rest whatever we injured to help it heal and get better. Now, this may be true for certain injuries. So for example, if I break a bone, I probably don't want to be just trying to use my arm that is dangling and not able to be connected to my body. Or if I rupture a tendon and it's no longer connected, rest is probably completely appropriate, especially after you have surgery to reattach the tendon. And we need time for it to calcify and harden before we start appropriately loading it. However, if we do look at the literature in some of these situations, a lot of the literature is pointing towards the idea that we do want to start introducing appropriate loads to those structures earlier and earlier in rehab. Now, aside from when we have an injury where we completely rupture something like breaking a bone or rupturing a tendon, what do we do if we just irritate something? I sprain something, I strain something, my joint gets a little bit irritable. How do we appropriately address these injuries? So in these cases, the capacity of the tissue does not drop down to zero. So I'm going to introduce to you an oversimplified way of looking at this idea. So when I am young and I am uninjured, I have a lot of capacity. I can run and jump and play and push and pull, a lot of different things that's within the capacity of my tissue. When I get injured, and it's not a complete rupture or it's not a broken bone, my capacity does decrease, but it doesn't go to zero. It decreases to some amount depending on the severity of the injury. How much did we get a strain, or how irritable did the joint get? There's still going to be things within the capacity of that tissue that I can do, and there are going to be things that are outside of the capacity that I probably should rest from. And it is important to try to figure out, well, what activities am I still able to do? Because one of the ideas is that if I were to completely rest, our bodies are amazing at adapting the stresses that we place upon it. So for example, if I have this much capacity and I completely rest, I go to zero capacity, what's going to happen to the capacity of my tissue over time? Theoretically, it will decrease in its strength as time goes on, where I'm not using it, I'm completely resting it. And this is a problem because you hear this a lot, and especially in some long distance runners, if they get an injury, they completely rest from it, and then they try to get back into running once it starts feeling better, well then they get re-injured. And so the problem lies in the fact that they completely rested, and so the tolerance of the tissue is gradually decreasing as it does start feeling better because we're resting it, and it's able to start, the inflammation process is clearing out and feeling a little bit better. But the problem is that the strength of the capacity of the tissue has decreased. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to make sure that we are appropriately loading this tissue. And appropriately loading means that I am doing things that are really close to the capacity of that tissue. And as I am doing that, as the inflammation is doing its job and the tissue is healing and certain fibers are being laid down, we are also introducing load to the tissue, which helps facilitate that process and strengthen the tissue in question as time goes on. So as the tissue starts healing, my strength of the tissue goes up. We can then increase the amount of activity or exercises, therapeutic exercises that we are doing, and then theoretically we can start chasing up this capacity. Now, again, this analogy is oversimplified, but it's the basic idea that we do need to make sure that we are not completely resting something, that we do want to introduce appropriate loads as we are healing from an injury. Now, what does that look like? For everybody, it's going to be a little bit different. We all come to the table with different backgrounds, different movement histories, goals of what we want to get back towards. And so this is where the art of physical therapy really comes into play. Now, some people might have the question, well, what happens if my doctor puts me in a boot? And my answer to that question is that the doctor is thinking that the amount of capacity that that tissue is able to withstand is this much, and that walking is above the capacity of that tissue. So because of just the mere act of walking around, it potentially is going to make it a lot harder for that tissue to recover because it's above that capacity. I would argue that that is a good case and we should wear the boot if that's the thinking. However, there should be periods of time where maybe we take the boot off and we do some exercises or various things that are within the capacity of that tissue. Because again, if I let it completely rest, what happens to the strength of the capacity of that tissue? It will theoretically get a little weaker. And so even if I'm wearing a boot because of some tissue that is intolerant of walking around, then I would argue, we still need to be working on a lot of exercises to help build up that structure so that walking now becomes within the capacity of that tissue. I hope you guys found this video beneficial. If you guys have any comments or questions, leave those down in the comment sections below. And as always, I hope you guys have a great day.